Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph at the very top. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah, various things that are done on the 15th of Adar. Mesaknes Hadrochin, they would fix the roads after the rain season for any debris that might have come onto the roads and covered up the roads. Ves HaRechoivos, Ves HaMikvos HaMayim, they would also make sure that any debris that fell into the Mikvos HaMayim were cleaned out, as well as ensuring that the shear of the mikvah was 40 saw. Voicing Kol Tzarchei Harabim, and they would also do other necessary things for the community. The Gemara now brings the following brisa of those various things that were done for the community. Eile hein Tzarchei Harabim. These are those, says the brisa, that were done for the rabbim. Danin dine mamonois, v'dine nefoshois, dine makos. They would adjudicate various cases, whether they're monetary cases or capital cases, or things that a person might require getting a punishment of malchus. Upoidin erechin v'charomim v'hagdeishois. They would also make sure that those erechin vows were paid up. Erechin is those values that a person takes upon himself to then give to the Beis HaMikdash, the value of a certain person. Charabim are also things that are consecrated v'hagdeishos to the Beis HaMikdash. Umashkines hasoite, they would also determine which women would indeed have to go through the process of giving the waters if they were determined to be suspected of adultery. The sorfines hapara, they would burn the para aduma to make sure that the ashes are prepared for those who need it, to have the sprinkling of these ashes to become tahor. The orfin egla arufa, they would break the egla arufa. Egla arufa is when a dead body was found. They would measure the closest city, and the egla, it was killed from its back, from the back of its neck. It was decapitated. V'roitzin eved ivri, that's when they would give the hole in the right ear of the eved ivri. After 6 years, he decides he wants to remain with his master. They take him to the doorpost and they bore a hole into his ear. Umetarin es ha-mitzara. Metarin the mitzara is done then as well. Umfarkin es ha-minal me al gabe hamayim ve'machzivna oison. Here the gears that we have in front of us is that they would take out mefarkin es ha-minal, over here refers to the lock. They would have a cistern of water that would accumulate the water over the course of the rainy season. They would unlock this cistern so that during the summer season they would be able to then have this water. However, in machzivun they wouldn't return them. However, most of the mefarshim have a slightly different girsa. Mefarkin es haminal here doesn't refer to a lock, but rather the shoe. Me al gabe imum. The imum is referring to the mold that the shoe is placed upon. That was able to be taken off on Chol HaMoed, because that's not considered to be a Maisa Umin. They machzivun, but they would not be able to put it on. That would be considered Maisa Umin. And although this last explanation is nothing to do with a communal Tzarchei Harabim, but nonetheless, this is quoted in the end of that brisa. The Gemara now brings the following: Tamon Taninon. We were taught over there another brisa that states Mashkines HaSholchin umetzayin ala kvoros. It states over there that we would water this. We would be able to water the sodos there in the beginning of Chol HaMoed, and it states umetzayin ala kvoros, and we'd be able to make signs on the kvoros to indicate that there is a kever, whereby if there's a Kohen or somebody else who has something that is truma, to indicate that somebody should not come to that area and become tamei as a result of that kever. Ask the Gemara, Loi kvar tzinu me'adar. Our Mishnah stated that already from the 15th of Adar, they're already mitzayin the kvaros. So why is it stated over again in the beginning of Cholamoy, presumably already in the beginning of even Cholamoy Pesach, which is a short time later, 1 month later? Says the Gemara, V'siftor sheyored shetef ala gashamim ushtafoy. Here the Gemara answers because if a lot of water came and was washing away the lime which is used to make the tziyun of the kever, whereby they have to then put the sign again. So whatever was done on the 15th of Adar could have been washed away, whereby they now have to then reinstitute and put another tziyun in its place. The Gemara asks, similarly, v'yotzin af alai kilayim lo kvar yatsu me'adar. There the Brisa says that they go out to then determine that the kilayim was indeed uprooted. Now there's a Mishnah says that they announced on the 1st of Adar to those communities, whoever has kilayim admixtures that are osir min Torah, to uproot them. They go ahead, and the Mishnah says on the 15th, and check whether that was done. Ask the Gemara, so why are they doing that? V'yotzin alaf al kloim lo kvar yatsu me'adar. Why does it state again that they will go out and check? Wasn't already done in Adar, in the 15th of Adar. So why do they have to do that again? Says the Gemara, Tiftar shahaisa shana afilo vein atzmochi nachrim. Nikarim. The Gemara explains because here we're talking about a year where the tzmochim was not developed, and therefore they could not determine even the 15th of Adar that there was an admixture that was grown and not uprooted, whereby they'd have to send others again in the beginning of the Cholamoy to uproot these admixtures, these kilayim. Ask the Gemara, going back to making tziyunim on kvarim, minayin litziyun. From where do we know that indeed there's a requirement to make a sign above, or to indicate there's a kever whereby a person should not become tamei? Says the Gemara to explain, Reb Brechia, Reb Yaakov, Barbas Yaakov b'shem Reb Chunyo, the Bras Chavrin. That's a place. Bras Chavrin is the name of a place. Reb Yoiso, Amrei Lo, Reb Yaakov Bar Acha b'shem Reb Chunyo, the Bras Chavrion. Rav Chizkiya, Rav Uzia B'reid Rav Chunya, the Beis Chavrion. A different name of a place, slightly different, Beis Chavrion. B'shem Rav Chunya, the Beis Chavron. V'tamei yikra. It states in the Torah by its Matzorah that he has to declare tamei, that he has to then indicate to other people that he is tamei, that they should desist from coming close to him and becoming tamei. Kidei shetei tuma kara lecha bepiha. So that the tumah should be called out from his mouth. Again, that those who then come in his vicinity should not come too close to him and thereby become contaminated by his tumah. So too over here, we're then learning that when there is a state of tumah because of a kever, we have to make tziyunin so that people then are understanding they should not come close to become contaminated by that tumah. V'or memes loy proish, that one who is tamei says Tamei yikra, so he is declaring that he is tamei from his mouth, so that you should desist from coming close to him. Rabbi Ila b'shem Rabbi Shmuel b'Rabbi Nachman, he brings another pasuk to provide a source for where we know we are required to make tziyunim by a kever. It says, "Va'avru ha'oivrim ba'oretz," those who pass by, they traverse the land. V'ro etzem adam ubona etzlo tziyun. So here, the Gemara makes the following drasha on these words. Etzem, here we're talking about something that has to be mahil. So that will then provide a person, will become a tamei, a person, if he comes above the tziyun, above the kever rather. So it says, Etzem, mikan shemitzayin ala tzamos. Here we're talking about that even if it doesn't have flesh, the fact that it's an etzem itself, it will make a tziyun for those atzamos that can mitameh and make an oil. It has to be a certain amount, a quarter of a kav. Odom mikan shematzayin al shidra v'hagilgolis. Here, it states in the Pasuk Adam to indicate that if it's a bone that is the Shidra and the Galgolis, that's going to also then Maha'il and Mitamim. We have to make a tziyun in that kever. Ubana, what does it mean in the Pasuk when it's Ubana? Mikan shemitzayin al gabe Evan Kavua. It means that we have to then make a tziyun on an Evan Kavua. It can't be an Evan that is loose. As the Gemara now explains, Im oimer at, if you will say, al gabe Evan Tlusha, afi holchav mitam b'makom acher. Then, if it was an Evan that is something that can be rolled, that can not stay in one place, then indeed people will mistakenly think that this is itself something that is mitame, so that they'll take their kachim or whatever, the truma, and they'll burn it, and that would be incorrect. So it has to be dafka in an Evan that is kavua. Etzloi, it states in that pasuk, l'makom tahara, meaning to say you have to put the tziyun in a way that will indicate already before you get to the actual makam tuma that you'll be coming to that place. So there has to be before enough to give a person an indication and a heads up not to then come to that place where there's a kever in oihel. Tziyun, mikan litziyun. From here we learn out that you make tziyunim based on this pasuk. Says the Gemara, Omotza even achas mitzuyenes. If you find one even that is mitzuyenes, that is signed as an indication for a kever, then afal b'she'ein mekaymin kain ma'il aleh tamei. Then you can assume that there is tuma on top of that. Ani oimer meis mitzuyon v'haya nasun tachteo. I can then determine that there's a mace underneath this rock where there's a tziyun. Hayushtayim. However, if there's two rocks, then one at a distance from the other, then amayil alein tahor. Above the rocks I can assume is tahor, and in between is tamei. Umid beineim tamei. Because they put two rocks to indicate in between this area is where there's a mace. Im haya choresh bein tayim. If there was a plowed area between the two rocks, then harehen ki yichiyudiyos. Then I can assume that indeed these are individual places of tuma where these rocks are, and in between certainly nobody would not plow down a kever whereby that place in between is tohor. Beineim is tohor, b'sivosei in tamei. Again, between these two rocks are tohor because that's where it's plowed, and then around the rock itself is where there is tuma. Tani, the Gemara brings the following: Ein mitzaynin ala bosar, shemenis akel bosar. It says not to then put a tziyun on basar alone, talking about without the etzem, because the basar decays, and as a result, then it won't have a shear of a kezayis that will be mitamim. So therefore, don't put a tziyun for the basar. Rabbi Yosta bar Shunon boy kumi Rab Mona. Rabbi Yosi bar Shuna, he asked in front of Rab Mona, but there's a problem. If you don't do that, right now there is a kazayis of basar. So granted, in the future it will decay, it will decompose, and therefore in the future it won't be a shear. But right now there's a shear. So therefore, if a person somebody who does come across such a place, with this basar being a shiur, he will become tamei, and therefore the meat, for example, that he has, if it's going to be kachim or truma, it'll also then need to be burned. And if there's no tzion, he won't think that it needs to be burned. Omarle, Ramona responded, Mutav she's kalkalu boy leshova is kalkalu boy loilam. It's better that there should be a kilkul, just l'shav, this temporary period while it still has a shiur. Then in the future, where after a short period of time it'll decompose, whereby it won't be a shiur. So all of the future time, if you do make it tziyun, then somebody will then come with his kachim or truma, thinking that it indeed needs to be burnt, and he'll burn it erroneously. So it's better to make a mistake temporarily than a more a mistake that will last longer, have more ramifications. The Gemara now brings the next halacha, the second Mishnah, the Masechta. The Mishnah really is a continuation of the first Mishnah. The first Mishnah had stated that indeed, when it comes to the kilayim, again, the first of Adar, we announce in the various communities to uproot the kilayim. If on the 15th we did then send shluchim to determine if they did uproot. If not, then the shluchim themselves uproot the kilayim. Says the Mishnah, Amar Rav Yehuda barishoina hoyu oikrin umashlichin lifneim. Initially, these shluchim on the 15th of Adar would uproot, and they would throw them down in the field where they were uprooted. Misharabu Avei Aveira, the Mishnah tells, but however, once the Avei Aveira persisted in the Aveira of Kilayim, the Gemara will explain, Hoyu Mashlichin Ledrochim, then they would uproot these shluchim, they would uproot these Kilayim, and they would throw it on the road, leaving it in the field. Even that did not work, and the Gemara will explain why. And therefore, they made a takana that they would make a mitakana that all their field is now in a state of hefker. This would then be an incentive for those who own the field to truly uproot their own kilayim. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda, quoting our Mishnah, Tani, Amar Rav Yehuda. Now the Gemara brings a brisa that expands the words of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. Originally, the shluchim would go out and they would uproot the kilayim, and they would throw the uprooted kilayim in the field itself. But the owners of the field were overjoyed for two different reasons. Because first of all, the shluchim would do a malacha on their behalf. They would uproot and weed for them. Instead of them having to do this labor, they have the shluchim that would weed. And secondly, second of all, their animals were able to feed on the uprooted kilayim after they uprooted and put it on the fields. So therefore, that wasn't an incentive for them to do anything. They didn't mind leaving it, allowing the shluchim to take care of it. But it states, therefore, the shluchim then smartened up, and they said, instead of them having the benefit that their animals feed on these kilayim, we'll just uproot it, and we'll throw it into the road nearby, whereby it won't be able to then, it'll get destroyed, it'll get ruined, and the animals will not get any benefit. The Gemara goes on to say, however, they would still do menakesh, they would do the weeding on their behalf, and that itself was a benefit to the landowners, to the field owners. So therefore, therefore the final takana was that they would make their field hefker, and thereby that would be a true incentive for the field owner to uproot his kilayim. Ask the Gemara, Minayin shehefker bezdin hefker. Where do we know that the bezdin has the right to then make a takana that this field is hefker? The concept that we find in places in Shas called hefker bezdin hefker. What's the source of that? Gemara brings a pasuk. Dichsiv, it says, "V'chol asher lo yavo lishloishes hayamim." This is talking about Ezra and the Anshe Knesset Gedolah. They made the following announcement. They want to uproot all of those Jews who had foreign wives, Nochrim, and they wanted to then gather all the Jews together within 3 days. So they made the following announcement. Those who do not come within 3 days, all of their property will be confiscated, and he will be separated from the kahal, the people of the goyla. Minayin shehi petur min ha'maisos. Once you say that this is the source for hefker based in hefker, okay. How do we know that it has the same din as hefker as the classical hefker? A classical hefker, when a person mafkir his nechasim, let's say he has a field, and he's mafkir his field. So that field that is hefker is also potter from maisris. So when bezdin is mafkir, through this concept, hefker, bezdin, hefker, does that also make that to be also potter in maisros? Where do we know it from? Ask the Gemara. Answers the Gemara, Rabbi Yonasan bereid Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba, Shoma lo minhado. He says, hear it, we learned it from here, from the following. He brings a brisa. What does the brisa say? Ein ma'avrin es hashana. It says you cannot make a leap year in certain years. In other words, when the Bezdin finds it necessary to then add an Adar, so the Brisa says, Lo b'shvis, lo b'motzei shvis. They shall not do so on the 7th year of Shvis or the 8th year Motzei Shvis. V'im ibrua harei zimubez. But b'di'evid, if they did add a second Adar, then they may do so. Meaning b'di'evid, it's going to be good. So the Gemara wants to then prove from over here that lechara, if indeed the 7th year, which is Shvis, is Shvis, a year of fallow, of hefker, whereby there's no meiser in that year, when Bezdin added an additional month to that year, through an uber year, making it another Adar, that additional Adar during the Shvis will also then have the same din, whereby it's going to be potter from meiser. Gemara says, "V'chodesh echod shehu moisif loy potem meisros." Who? And the Gemara asks as a question: is it not that the additional month that the Bezdin made it into an additional leap year, additional month of that year, of the 7th year? Is it not going to be that additional month will also have the din of all of the rest of the year? That means it's going to be potter from meiser. Certainly, it will be. So therefore, we have a proof. Ad kedoin shvis, motzei shvis mai. The Gemara says that's very good by shvis, the 7th year. Why the Brisa says that they would not add an additional month in the year of the 7th year, because we understand, because that would require that there'll be an initial month that they cannot work the land. So that's understood. However, ask the Gemara, but what about the 8th year? Why can't they make an additional month, a leap year during the 8th year? Omer Rabbi Avun shaloi l'rabbis bi-iser chodosh, is not to then add to the iser of chodosh. We know when it comes to the old grain yashon, so that can only be eaten until the 2nd day of Pesach, the 16th of Nisan. So then that is matir, the new grain, the chodosh. So if you add an additional month to the 8th year, so then all of the previous things that were grown would have already been finished up, and now it's only going to then reproduce from the 8th year, whereby all of that chodesh, that new grain, will then have to be on hold until 1 month later, and that would be difficult for the people. So therefore, it's not a time to then add an additional month and make a leap year in the 8th year. Rabbi Zeir b'shem Rabbi Elazar chad da'at amar. This that you said, hitir Rebbe lahavi yerek michutz la'aretz, that which you said that you didn't want to ma'aber the shvis, going back to the shvis, that you said you want to make an additional month on the shvis itself. The Gemara says that's so long as Rebbe did not matir to bring yerek, greens, from chutz la'aretz Yisrael. Aval meshihit Rebbe lehavi yerek mechutz la'aretz, he shvis he shall shar shonei shavua. In other words, when it comes to, there was a certain gezerah that if we allow you to bring certain greens from chutz la'aretz, so those greens would come with soil from chutz la'aretz, and maybe they will have fragments of bones in that soil that you'll bring to Eretz Yisrael metameh. So therefore, they made a gezerah. So until that, while that gezerah was still in effect, then in a chanami you can't add an additional year in the shvis year as a leap year. But once Rabbi said there's no problem to then bring there's no more gzeir to bring greens from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, then Shvis is like any other year, and therefore there won't be a problem because you can go ahead and sustain the people with all of those greenery, as well as all of the things for like produce that doesn't have any issues of the soil to be brought from Chutz La'aretz, and they can then eat that without being a problem of Shvis. So even if they add an additional month, it won't be of concern. It'll be like any other year. The Gemara now says, Tani ein ma'avrin. The Gemara now brings that just as we said that you could go ahead and ma'aber the 7th year, the chara, you can also ma'aber the 8th year. Rabbi Mona hada da'at amar, that which you said, barishona shayu hashonim ketiknon, aval aksher she'ein hashonim ketiknon. Initially, when was it so that we said that you cannot go ahead and make an 8th year an uber year, adding a month to the 8th year? Well, the Gemara says that's when everything was ketiknon. That means when everything grew normally. But when things do not grow normally, they grew late, so then there's not going to be an issue. The Gemara explains. Because he, in Motzei Shvis, he sha'ar shnei shavua. Motzei Shvis will be like every other year, because since in such a situation where anyways the grain is growing late, so therefore it's inedible anyways. Once it's already inedible, so it doesn't make a difference the fact that it's going to be an additional month that will push off the chadash. We said before that the reason why you cannot make an additional month and make the 8th year into a leap year is because then you'll push off the Isser Chadash to one more month, and they need that grain. They need that grain to eat. But if you're telling me that it's anyways growing late, whereby it's inedible, so therefore it's anyway something that cannot be used. So an additional month does not make a difference, whereby we can yes add an additional month and make an 8th year into a leap year. Tani, the Gemara brings shall base Rabbi Gamliel to support this Ibrua b'motzei shvis miyad. Indeed, in Rabbi Gamliel, they did make the 8th year, and they were made into a leap year because of this reason, as we just explained. Says the Gemara, Vaiter Amar Rav Avin. Rav Avin now is going back on the proof that was brought previously by Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yonasan brought a proof that from a brisa that indeed one can go ahead and the hefker, bezdin hefker, is also going to be potter from maisris. So the Gemara is now challenging that which he brought before, that he said from a brisa that you really should not take the 7th year as a leap year, but if you did, then it works. Now he proved from there that lechara, just like the 7th year is supposed to lay fallow, nonetheless, and we know because as a result of Shavis is going to be potter from Meiser. If you're going to add an additional month, it'll have the same din, is that rest of the 7th year. That means that the hefker, bezdin hefker, makes it so that's also potter from Meiser. The Gemara now challenges. Amar of Avin. Amar of Avun. In minhada, if you want to prove less at shmamina klum, then you cannot derive anything from this. Why? Because shmor es chodesh ha'aviv, the pasuk says that you shall then guard this month of Aviv, referring to then having the Chag HaAviv being Pesach, and therefore shomreyu sheyaviu b'chidushoy, you shall guard it so that it shall then be in its renewal. That means the moon's renewal should be guarded in such a way that the first 14 days of Nisan should be able to then produce produce, should be able to then be Aviv, things should grow. And therefore we see that the Torah itself mandates the requirement of being Ma'aber the Shana. And therefore it's not a rabbinic Hefker, Bezin Hefker, but it's coming from the fact that the Torah itself says to do so. V'haida Amrei Do, from where do we know this? Says the Gemara, Godi shelo lukat tachtov kol hanogos ba'aretz harehein shelanim. The Gemara says, where do we do know that Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker will make it so that it's potter from the Meiser? The Gemara brings from the following Mishnah: Godi shelo lukat tachtov, a pile that a person's who gathered together, and he did not yet take leket from that area. Kol hanoigos ba'aretz harei hein shelanim. He says that they made a declaration. Chazal said they made a declaration that all of the sheaves, all of the grain that then touched the ground, that's considered to be hefker. So Gemara says, "Va'om Rabbi Ami b'shem," on top of Gimel Beis, b'shem Rabbi Shimon Lakish. The Beis Shammai, this is Beis Shammai. although they only made it for hefker for anim, that which he made a hefker for anim will still then have the same din that'll be truly hefker and then potter from maisris. So Gemara says that's true according to Beis Shammai. The ike Beis Hillel anim oichlin maisrin. According to Beis Hillel, if it's only going to be hefker for anim, then you would have to take meiser out, unless you then make it so that it's hefker for everybody, anim and ashirim. Only then does it have the pitur of meiser. But this, according to Beis Shammai, would only make it so that's potter from meiser. But according to Beis Hillel, it's not going to be potter from meiser. Omar Rav Yossi says, Shomanu shehu potter mi meiser, and this is going to be the proof. Why divrei hakol mishum knaso, that everybody agree that there's such a thing. It will be potter from meiser, even though here it's only going to be hefker for anim. Why? Because of the mechanism of hefker bezdin hefker. Because hefker bezdin hefker makes it so that the bezdin declared that this will be then hefker for the anim. They could also then make it so it's going to be potter from maisris, and therefore this is our proof that hefker bezdin hefker has the status of making not only a hefker but hefker legamre that's going to be potter also from meiser.